Hello, this is Tuxedo Blackfoot, and today I would like to cover the Russia invasion of Ukraine and why I put much of the blame for this on the failures of the Biden administration. First off, don't take anything I say here as fact. I'm just a random dude talking on the internet. It's taken me about, I don't know, 2 days to put this together in many different takes. So let's go over a few of the reasons that have been given for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And to start with, we have the shelling of Donbass. Ukraine has been involved in some amount of shelling in an area within its own borders known as Donbass. This area shares a border with Russia and contains people that are still more or less loyal to Russia. Ukraine has had an agreement to draw down the shelling and are stop entirely, and presumably they have not complied with this agreement. Now, the issue here is how much shelling has been basically lost in the fog of war. Ukraine claims they were doing no shelling. Russia claims that they amped up shelling. But I think it's reasonable to accept that Ukraine probably was doing some amount of shelling here and probably was violating that agreement. Now, I don't believe anyone listening to this honestly thinks Russia is doing this out of the goodness of their heart. But even if they were, invading another country for the purpose of defending citizens within that country against their own country is a surefire way to kill a lot of civilians and get nothing done. Now, I'm going to talk about the failures of US policy in a minute, but the fact that Putin did call his troops peacekeepers and invaded in this manner was done specifically to bring criticism onto the US because you cannot look at this situation without drawing parallels. But I am going to end this little portion by drawing one last parallel. Just the same way I don't believe the US invaded the Middle East strictly out of the goodness of its heart. I don't believe Russia is invading the Ukraine out of the goodness of its heart either. In both situations, there is a very obvious alternative motive, both of which are buried just beneath the ground. There are another couple points surrounding NATO that I want to bring up. One is that parallels are being made between the Cuban Missile Crisis and some comments someone within NATO made about putting nuclear missiles within the borders of Ukraine. The major problem here is that I am not aware of any actual plans or even significant agreement that was a good idea or that any of this was actually happening. With the Cuban Missile Crisis, not only were there plans to put nuclear missiles within Cuba, these plans were being enacted when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. I do not believe that NATO took any of this seriously, nor do I believe anyone in Russia took it seriously, although I do believe that this may be brought up as an attempt to justify the invasion from Russia and those who may defend Russia. Now, there is one other point surrounding NATO that I'd like to make, and that is there were talks about Ukraine joining NATO at the time Russia invaded. Now, these were just talks. This had not happened yet, but there's a very real potential that it was going to happen. Now, there's negatives and positives to this. The positive is that if Ukraine was in NATO, Russia may not have ever attacked because such decisions would have become much more risky. The negative is that if they did choose to attack Ukraine, we would not be talking about a potential World War III right now. We would be talking about World War III. Chances are good that all other Western countries, as part of NATO, would have felt obligated to send troops because that's kind of the point of NATO. As it stands, while aid is being provided to the Ukraine, there are no actual troops in the matter. Things such as fuel, missiles, weapons, and apparently helmets are being sent to the Ukraine. Troops are not. So if Russia wanted to invade Ukraine, it would be much better for them to do it before Ukraine is part of NATO instead of after. So that very likely did factor in to at least speed up plans they previously had to invade Ukraine. Now let's get into the more likely reasons Russia has invaded Ukraine. First and foremost, natural gas. Russia does export natural gas and supplies various other countries and has been known to cut off that supply of natural gas, usually in winter when people are depending on it to survive the cold, in order to get countries to comply with whatever demands they have. This natural gas is generally supplied by pipelines such as Nord Stream 2. In addition to the resource itself, acquiring Ukraine would encourage the building of other pipelines, as well as provide easier access to a port within the Ukraine. Those that remember Crimea will remember that this port was a major factor in that. I think most rational people will look at the situation and conclude that it's almost assuredly these reasons that Russia wants control of Ukraine, and not so much out of the goodness of their own heart. So, with that being said, we've discussed some of the reasons Russia would want to invade Ukraine. But of course, there was a strange little period of time where Russia did not invade Ukraine. That was, of course, during the Trump presidency. So, what exactly has changed between the time Trump was in office and the time Biden was in office? Well, since we're talking about natural resources, let's talk about the Keystone Pipeline. Now, I, like many other people, did not like the way the Keystone Pipeline was made. We should never have put it through Native American lands. We should have gone around. There was, in fact, a city that we were going to put it through, but the city said, no, we don't want it. So, of course, we went to these Native American people and put it on their land over their objection. It was amazingly shameful, but nevertheless, the pipeline was up. And of course, one of the first things Biden did is cancel that pipeline. The canceling of the Keystone Pipeline on day one of the Joe Biden presidency by executive order with his signature is one of the many reasons that I put our current economic status squarely on the shoulders of Joe Biden. Not only did he cancel the pipeline, but he also canceled much of the new drilling that would have occurred within the United States. And there isn't even really an environmental argument to be made because all this drilling that would have happened instead happens in places like Russia now, places that could care less about the environment or any regulations put on them to protect the environment. So, to bring things back to the invasion of Ukraine, these pipeline decisions affected that in three major ways. First off, Russia now has an incentive to acquire new sources of natural gas because they are now exporting them to countries such as Germany. Second, these countries such as Germany no longer have an American alternative to go to should they choose to not import Russian energy sources. Instead, they will have to rely on other countries, or a very real possibility of facing an energy shortage themselves. Do remember, Russia has in the past used their exports of natural gas to control other countries. Granted, they were not the size of Germany, but why couldn't they be? Thirdly, this is just one of many cuts that Joe Biden has made to the American economy. And of course, with every cut to the American economy, it makes it less likely America will be capable of pushing back. Even if you take away the possibility of troop invasions, for responses such as sanctions, you need a good economy. There is no such thing as an effective sanction that doesn't also hurt the country making the sanction. Trade is a two-way street. You buy goods from a country because it helps you. That country sells goods to you because it helps them. So, yes, for any sanction to be effective, it's got to hurt both the country that sells and buys the goods. The objective of a sanction is to implement some demand that you believe will help you in the long run. But of course, the pipelines are not the only decision that Biden has made that may have contributed to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We also have Afghanistan. I do not have the words to describe how terrible that decision was. Leaving aircraft, tanks, missiles, night vision in Afghanistan for your terrorist enemies to use as they desire, it just boggles the mind. And it's not just Americans seeing this. We also, of course, have all of our allies and all of our enemies watching this as well. Russia, China, North Korea, all of these places looked at Afghanistan and said, you know what? If we're going to pull some shit, these next 4 years are a real good time to pull some shit. Because this president is not going to be able to handle it. And furthermore, anyone that is currently appointed by Joe Biden likewise seems like they will be unable to handle it. General Milley should have been removed the second Afghanistan happened, but instead he's talking about white rage. And of course, some of his other appointees. Oh, who is that? Sound Britain, Department of Energy. This person, I'm not even going to attempt a pronoun. This person, by all appearances, seems to have been appointed because he was into puppy play, because he is a drag queen, and not because of qualifications. I have no problem what you do on your own time. I have no problem what race or gender you are. If you do any of these things and are qualified for the positions, by all means. My issue comes when these things take priority over qualifications. And between Biden's vice president pick, where he stated, oh, I'm going to pick a black female, between his statement on the Supreme Court nominee, oh, I'm going to pick a black female over qualifications. There is a word for this, at least there was before the left redefined it as something else. It is called racism and sexism. When we have things like this going on in Afghanistan, with General Milley talking about white rage and then absolutely abandoning our allies in Afghanistan, our citizens in Afghanistan, there's a problem. If you don't think our enemies see this and are laughing at us every step of the way, then maybe you should consider asking a Ukrainian. I think it's pretty clear to them what's happening right now. But with that, I'm logging off. I'll see you guys next time.